Hey everybody, what is going on? Hexlex here. I got another Master Duel video for you. So today I wanted to make a little bit of a guide to board breakers in the current Master Duel meta. I recently made a video on hand traps in particular, which I'll go ahead and link down below, either in the description or the pinned comment, so you can check that out if you want some more tips on other off-engine cards. But in this particular meta right now, board breakers are actually really good, not only because of the kinds of boards being set up, but just also due to the quality of these cards. So I wanted to make sure that we set aside some time to talk about them specifically here as well. Real quick before we dive into it, wanted to up top shout out our Patreon subscribers and YouTube members. As some of you probably know by now, if you join here as a member on YouTube, you get to see all content early as soon as it's uploaded, which is at least a few days, but up to a week before when it goes live. And there's also some members exclusive content. And speaking of that exclusive content, over on patreon.com/hexlex, I upload at least 3 times a week, and it's all exclusive content that is not uploaded on YouTube. It's only over on Patreon. So if you feel like checking either of those out and supporting the channel, it's really appreciated. Either subscribing to Patreon or joining as a YouTube member will also get your name at the end credits of every video. But now that we've covered all that, let's get right on into some of the best board breakers for the current Master Duel meta. All right, let's go ahead and start with one of the newest board breakers that's definitely making a huge splash since its relatively recent release, and that's going to be the branded card known as the Fallen and the Virtuous. Now, this is a quick play spell card, which of course by sending a monster from your extra deck to the graveyard that mentions Fallen of Albaz, that will be able to either destroy a face-up card on the field that you target or revive a monster from your graveyard if you have an Ecclesia monster in your graveyard. So this is not only seeing play, of course, in branded and decks that utilize, branded as an engine with the new Fallen of White, but it's also seeing play in decks like Sky Striker, or really just anything. Radiant Typhoon's another big one that's picked it up, where they're not using a dedicated branded engine, only Fallen and the Virtuous. And the reason for this is because Fallen the Virtuous is not only really effective at dealing with cards, obviously, again, by targeting and then destroying any face-up card on the field, but it's also the only board breaker on this list that actually has the ability to recur itself, because when you send, for example, Albion, the branded dragon, which is the fusion one, from the extract to the graveyard, then during your end phase, you can either set or add to your hand another copy of Fallen and the Virtuous, which of course will then allow you to keep destroying cards, making it a board breaker that doesn't just hit multiple targets, but can even hit multiple cards over multiple turns. And that's one of the big reasons why a lot of these newer decks are taking a shining to it, or rather I should say a lot of these decks are taking a shining to this newer card. I really do like it quite a bit. Now, there is obviously going to be an extra deck requirement here of at least 2 cards, that being Albion the Branded Dragon, I believe is the name of the fusion monster one, as well as Ecclesia and the Dark Dragon, which is a synchro monster. Ecclesia and the Dark Dragon will not only fulfill the requirement of having an Ecclesia monster in the graveyard, just in case you really do want that revive effect, but moreover, by using Ecclesia and the Dark Dragon's graveyard effect, you can actually put back herself and Albion into your extra deck to not only shuffle a card on your opponent's field back into their deck, but then also your 3rd copy of Fallen of the Virtuous will be live, even though you only have 2 branded extra deck monsters in, well, your extra deck, right? So all in all, I think Fallen in the Virtuous does end up being a really good bang for your buck when it comes to, not only effectiveness as a board breaker card, but also its extra deck requirement, which is not unique. We'll definitely talk about other board breaker cards that do require some amount of cards in your extra deck. Now, I think as far as weaknesses go, the biggest one for Fallen the Virtuous is the fact that it only does target and destroy one face-up card, unlike a lot of these other board breakers we're going to talk about, which have the ability to deal with multiple cards all in one fell swoop. So for that reason, it is worth considering if you really want to be able to handle like an entire board, an alternative card But I do think that Fallen and the Virtuous is not only good for just those kind of grindy control decks that really care about quick play spells. Again, we already talked about Sky Striker and Radiant Typhoon, but even in general, it's also really worth considering for its ability to not only handle cards over multiple turns, but also pivot into either reviving monsters or shuffling monsters back. It really is very versatile as far as that goes, which does make it very, very good. All right, next up, we're going to talk about Super Polymerization, a card that was recently semi-limited, so you can only play 2 copies of this now, and for a good reason. Super Polymerization is a card that does have a lot of requirements and costs behind it. Not only do you have to discard a card just to activate Super Polymerization, but similar to Fallen the Virtuous, it does have an extra deck requirement. The extra deck requirement is just for whatever fusion target you want to be able to go into. It doesn't have to be from a specific archetype, but you do want to have some fusion monsters that have very general requirements. The most common ones, of course, being Muddragon of the Swamp, Garura, the Resonant Wings of Life. Other popular targets do include Sea Monster of Theseus, mostly against Cool Tunes specifically, because the fusion materials are 2 tuner monsters, and a newer fusion monster that also makes for a great Super Polymerization target is the new Starving Venom for Heavenly Dragons, because not only are its requirements simply 2 dark monsters on the field, very easy to meet, but also it negates a monster's effect and reduces attack to 0 on being summoned, and has a quick effect that would allow you to fusion summon during your opponent's turn, which is, of course, very, very potent. So this one's a little bit more situational as far as what you summon is going to obviously depend on what the board state looks like. And that on top of the costliness of having to discard a card and requiring at bare minimum 2 extra deck slots are a lot of the drawbacks of Super Polymerization. But of course, I haven't mentioned its greatest strength yet, which is the fact that your opponent cannot activate cards or effects in response to Super Poly. This, of course, means that no matter what kind of effects your opponent has on the field, if they negate spell cards, if they respond meaningfully in really any kind of a way, they're not even able to use them at all, which is very, very important, and a lot of the reason why Super Poly is as costly as it is, requiring the discard. Of course, the fusion materials can come from either field, so you can also fuse away 2 of your opponent's monsters, another of the big strengths behind this card. So, as far as Super Polymerization goes, it's actually very similar to Fallen the Virtuous in a lot of ways, mostly the extra deck requirement. If you have a deck that has a few extra deck slots open, 2 to 3, then you should definitely consider the Super Poly. And if you're playing a fusion-based deck, all the better, right? Not only because you fit in something like Starving Venom, which also fusion summons, but even a deck like Branded, for example, a lot of the time they use Super Poly. It's just to be able to fusion summon one of their own monsters without having the opponent being able to respond. So the card is even better in a fusion-based deck. All in all, I think that Super Poly, while being semi-limited, does hurt it a little bit as far as its consistency goes. It's definitely being considered still for a lot of decks and for a good reason. Again, mostly decks with those available extra deck slots. But if you don't mind that in the discard, this is definitely one of the most powerful board breakers available right now. All right, next up, we're going to talk about Forbidden Droplet. Now, this one doesn't necessarily require you to play anything specific in your extra deck, unlike the other cards we've covered so far. Its costliness rather comes from your hand and field, because in order to activate Forbidden Droplet, you of course have to send cards from your hand or field to the graveyard up to the number of cards on your opponent's field you want to negate, which is definitely making it the most costly card among the ones we've discussed so far. However, this does also come with an upside, because much like Super Poly, based on the types of cards you send for Forbidden Droplet, your opponent won't be able to respond with the corresponding type of effects based on whether you send monsters, spells, or trap cards. And with just a little bit of knowledge, which you'll likely have, especially if you're going second, you'll know what's on your opponent's board and likely most of, if not all, of what's in their hand as well. You will then be able to appropriately send the right things to make sure they're not able to respond. The thing about Forbidden Droplet, like I said, is that you do have to often send multiple cards with it in order to get the max effectiveness out of it. For that reason, The requirement to use Forbidden Droplet is less about having the right kind of cards in your extra deck and more of the ability to send the appropriate amount of cards from your hand or field and not have that be too costly. There are multiple ways to get through this, right? One of the more obvious ones is that if you have cards that want to be in your graveyard, you obviously don't mind sending them for a Droplet. We see this a lot in like Orcust is a really, really good example of a deck that really wants to play Droplet, right? Because they definitely don't mind sending stuff like Harpor, Nightmare, Orcust Nightmare, Symbol Skeleton, etc. to the graveyard to not only negate the opponent's field of monsters, but also then make their graveyard plays live. Fairy Tale's another pretty decent example of this, of a deck that definitely does not mind sending cards to the graveyard to then use their graveyard effects to continue comboing. But more than that, Forbidden Droplet also has a pretty good use case of being able to send cards that are already face up on the field and resolving to the graveyard. In particular, normal spell and normal trap cards, right? If you, for example, were to activate a spell card and then chain Forbidden Droplet, sending that normal spell card to the graveyard, you can not only negate the effect of one of your opponent's monsters, but you effectively did it for free because normal spell and normal trap cards do not have to remain face up on the field in order to resolve, meaning you'll still get their effect while also using them as a cost for Forbidden Droplet. Be aware you can't do this with continuous spell and trap cards, nor field or equip spells. Those kinds of cards do have to remain face up on the field in order to resolve. But again, a normal spell or normal trap card does not have to stay in play. So you could easily send those for Droplet, very much circumventing the cost of having just straight up send a card from your hand to the graveyard. So Droplet has a lot of versatility behind it, and that really does make it a little bit more potent in certain areas than other cards on this list, but you definitely do want to only use it in decks that can either afford to send a lot of cards to the graveyard to then use their effects in the graveyard, or can send cards from the field as they're resolving. Something like Sky Striker, right? Can activate Engage and then send it off of Droplet, and then you're good to go. Sky Striker also just wants a lot of spells in their graveyard. So Droplet is less of an extra deck requirement and a little bit of an unofficial main deck requirement to be the most effective. Okay, so this next board breaker spell that I'm going to talk about is different from the others in that it's not a quick play spell, but it's still good regardless of whether you're going first or second, and that is Triple Tactics Talent. A very versatile spell card that has a lot of different functions behind it. Of course, in order to activate it, your opponent must first use a monster effect during that same turn. So unlike the other cards where their use case for going first is, you setting them and then using them on your opponent's turn because they're quick play spells, Triple Tactics Talent, the use case for when you go first is that your opponent uses a hand trap against you, and then you can activate it. But of course, if you're going second and you're playing into an opponent's board, they're a lot more likely to activate monster effects against you. And because this card does have the option to take control of an opponent's monster, it can very much act as a board breaker, and one that is a lot stronger in a lot of ways, because sometimes you can even take an opponent's monster that can negate or disrupt the opponent back in certain ways, right? So now you've not only removed the threat from their field, but you've added a threat to your own field. But as mentioned, this is also still really good going first, mostly for the other two effects, right? If you don't have any other starters in your hand after your opponent's hand trap to you, you can Triple Tactics Talent and draw two to find another one. Or if you have an extender or another starter and you've got those follow-up plays anyway, then you can just look at your opponent's hand and shuffle a card from it back into their deck, thereby stopping their ability to either make plays or disrupt yours. So the main weakness of Triple Tactics Talent, as opposed to some of the other quick play spells that we've mentioned already, lies in the fact that it doesn't have a cost in order to activate, but rather an activation requirement. And that requirement is that your opponent uses a monster effect. So if your opponent's not doing that, then this card is just sitting dead in your hand, which does happen a decent amount of the time. But also by that same prospect, if your opponent is not making the triple tactics talent live, then if you're going first, that means they don't have any hand traps. If you're going second, that means they don't have any meaningful disruption on their end board. So even in situations where the triple tactics talent isn't live, those are still good situations a lot of the time for you to be in. Now, granted, there are some, outliers here. Like if your opponent uses hand traps that aren't actually monster cards, but actual trap cards, like Infinite Impermanence, obviously that's going to be a bit of a tough situation if you've got triple tactics talent. And the same if your opponent went first and they set a bunch of face down spell or trap cards. Obviously, the triple tactics talent only being able to be used if your opponent uses a monster effect means that if they're on spell or trap cards, it doesn't really have as much use at all. But that said, I really like triple tactics talent, and although I have it as a board breaker card here, you could also put it in the same vein of like call by and cross out, in that it's just a good general anti-hand trap tool as well. That kind of versatility is really what makes triple tactics talent one of the outlier cards on this list. It's one of the better ones in my opinion, and one that I am very eager to put into a lot of decks. All right, now here towards the end, I wanted to talk about board breakers that are specifically good going second. Now, this is a topic that I've discussed at length in, any number of videos that, in my opinion, in Master Duel, specifically for Ranked Ladder, which is of course best of one, if you're going to be playing a board breaker card, it should be one that's good going first or second. So while cards like Raigeki, Lightning Storm, and Evenly Matched have a lot of power behind their removal effects, they all have the same common weakness, which is that if you are going first, then they don't have any function at all. Now, at the very least, a card like Raigeki could be used on turn 3, but, Lightning Storm and Evenly Matched cannot be activated so easily from your hand if you have cards on your field, which does make them a little bit more situational, and I think as a result also makes them weaker in my opinion. Now, I don't think these cards are weak, period. The strength, the pro of using these cards over anything else I've talked about is that their effects are a lot more impactful, right? We've talked about cards that can maybe destroy one card or negate a number of cards in the field, but cards like Raigeki and Lightning Storm very easily and often destroy multiple cards all at once, and Evenly Matched can even banish multiple cards all at once, which circumvents a great deal of effects that would otherwise benefit from being destroyed or sent to the graveyard. So that's not to say these cards are bad by any means. They obviously have a lot of power behind them, but again, that big weakness that they don't do much, if anything at all, when you actually go first. And again, for a Master Duel's best of one format specifically, I think that 95% of the time, you are a lot better off with any of the other previously mentioned board breaker cards as opposed to these. Now, there are some decks that would like to play cards like this. Obviously, anything that wants to go second, like Gem Knight or Tempai or anything else trying to OTK while specifically going second. But even a deck like White Force, which can discard spell or trap cards, or rather send them to the graveyard to make use of their effects, then these cards aren't just sitting dead in your hand. Then at least they do serve some kind of function within your strategy if you go first, right? So there are some situations where I do think it is good to play these cards, but generally speaking, I would pretty much always defer to any of the other cards I've mentioned before these, before looking to these specifically going second board breakers. All right, that's pretty much going to do it as far as cards I wanted to talk about here today. There are, of course, a great deal of board breakers out there, so if there's any that you feel should be covered as well, definitely feel free to let me know in the comments below, and I'll gladly chime in with my opinions on other board breaker cards. But yeah, for now, that's going to go ahead and do it. As mentioned, huge thank you to not just the YouTube members and Patreon subscribers, as we talked about at the beginning of the video, but also if you're watching this still at the end of the video, that is one of the best ways ways to support not just me, but any YouTube channel. So really, I want to thank you so much for watching all the way till the end. But we do need to give an extra special thanks to those supporters. So let's move on to the end credits where we can thank our Patreon subscribers and YouTube members. Hey everybody, Hexlex here. Thank you so very much for watching all the way to the very end of the video, which by the way is one of the best ways to support the channel. Speaking of supporting the channel, take a look at the names on screen. These are folks who have been so generous as to either join as a YouTube member or subscribe over on patreon.com/Hexlex to support. There's also perks for doing so. If you would like to see YouTube videos early, as well as some exclusive videos that get uploaded to YouTube, but for one reason or another I decide not to publish, definitely go ahead and hit that join button to see content early, as well as some exclusive content. If you're looking for more exclusive content, over on patreon.com, I upload exclusive videos that are not posted on YouTube just about every single day. Whether you choose to subscribe over on Patreon, join as a YouTube member, or simply continue to watch, your support is greatly appreciated. Thank you so very much. But for now, this is Hexlex. I am signing out, and I hope that you have a fantastic day.